Have you ever, found yourself pointing a finger at someone else's flaws and just feeling, I don't know, just a little bit morally superior?
Oh, all the time.
Right. Like maybe you're watching the news or you're scrolling through social media or even just sitting in traffic.
Traffic is the worst for that.
It is. Someone cuts you off and you immediately think, what an absolute maniac.
Exactly.
You think, people today have zero respect, zero awareness. I would never, ever do that.
Right. You put yourself right up on that pedestal.
Exactly. But then, maybe 2 days later, you're running late, you're stressed out, you misjudge the distance, and you accidentally cut someone off.
And you totally justify it.
You do. What happens in your brain at that exact moment? You don't call yourself a maniac.
No way.
No. You say, well, that was an honest mistake. I mean, I'm in a rush. My intentions were good.
Yeah, we judge others by their actions,
Mm-hmm.
but we judge ourselves by our intentions.
Yes. We have this incredible, almost terrifying human capacity to demand strict justice for everyone else while demanding absolute grace and understanding for ourselves.
It's just wild how the human brain works.
It really is. We judge the outside world with a magnifying glass, but we completely refuse to look in the mirror.
It creates this profound blindness to our own hypocrisy, It's one of the most universal psychological phenomena there is.
Exactly. And that uncomfortable reality, that exact blindness is what we are tearing into today. So welcome to Reformed Thinking.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are embarking on a fresh deep dive into a really fascinating stack of study notes from the Faithlife Study Bible, and we are focusing entirely on one of the most explosive, uncomfortable pieces of ancient writing in existence.
Uncomfortable is definitely the right word for it.
Right. It's the second chapter of the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans, and the mission for this deep dive, for you listening, is pretty uncompromising.
We are not pulling any punches today.
We really aren't. We are dismantling the illusion of moral superiority. We're going to examine how Paul brilliantly, and quite systematically, honestly, how he shifts that glaring spotlight from the obvious, undeniable sins of the outside world directly onto the hidden, polite hypocrisy of the religious insider.
It really is a masterful rhetorical trap.
A trap, yes.
Yeah, and to your point about it being uncomfortable, it's supposed to be. If you read this text and you aren't at least a little bit squirming in your seat, you probably aren't reading it closely enough.
Right. You're missing the point.
Exactly. Paul is essentially holding up a mirror to a group of people who were entirely convinced they were the ones holding the magnifying glass.
And I want to say right up front to you listening, whether you are a theology student who dissects these texts every single day, or, you're just someone who is endlessly fascinated by human nature and how we deceive ourselves, this deep dive is designed specifically for you.
Because this text doesn't let anyone off the hook.
No one. It forces us to question whether we are resting our confidence on our external labels, like our political affiliations, our church attendance, or our family heritage, rather than on actual internal transformation.
Which is a tough pill to swallow.
It really is. So to really feel the weight of this, we need to set the scene. Before we can even touch chapter 2, we have to understand the momentum Paul has built up in chapter 1. So walk us through where this letter just came from.
Well, to appreciate the trap, you really have to understand the bait.
Ooh, the bait. I like that.
Yeah, in the first chapter of Romans, Paul lays out this devastating, sweeping critique of the Gentile world.
And just to clarify, for a first-century Jewish listener, Gentile basically meant what?
It basically means the pagan, non-Jewish world, the people entirely outside the covenant.
Got it.
So Paul describes a culture that has actively rejected God, they've suppressed the truth of creation, and they just flat out refuse to acknowledge their creator. And as a result, he outlines God's righteous judgment against a society that is spiraling into profound moral decay, idolatry, and just all sorts of brokenness.
He builds this massive, massive catalog of visible, undeniable sins. I mean, it's talking about greed, envy, murder, deceit, gossip. It's a heavy list.
It's very heavy.
And if you are a religious insider in the first century, so let's say you're a Jewish Christian sitting in a house church in Rome, and you're hearing this letter read aloud for the very first time.
You are probably nodding along vigorously.
Exactly. You're probably thinking, yes, absolutely, Paul. Give it to them.
Yeah.
The pagan world out there is an absolute mess. They are getting exactly what they deserve.
Feeling very comfortable.
Right. You feel safe because the artillery fire is aimed out there at those people.
Precisely. They're feeling very secure, very vindicated. They see themselves as this moral remnant surrounded by a sea of pagan corruption.
But then
But then the page turns to chapter 2, and Paul executes a pivot that would have just taken all the air out of the room.
I can just imagine the silence.
Oh, yeah. He takes all that momentum, all that enthusiastic agreement from the religious insider who is judging the pagan world, and he turns the cannon right back around to face them.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the way he does it is so subtle at first. I mean, verse 1 of chapter 2 starts with this incredibly ambiguous you.
Right, the generic you.
Yeah, Paul says, "Therefore you have no excuse, O man, every one of you who judges." He doesn't immediately name them.
He keeps them guessing.
He does. It isn't until much later in verse 17 that he explicitly says, hey, I'm talking to the Jews, the people relying on the law. But right from the jump, he says that the person passing judgment is without excuse.
Exactly.
What is its core argument here?
His core argument is devastatingly simple. You have no excuse, because when you pass judgment on someone else, you condemn yourself.
Yeah.
Because you, the judge, practice the very same things.
Wait, the same things? Like the laundry list of sins from chapter 1?
Yes. The study notes in the Faithlife Bible tie us directly back to the sins listed in Romans 1, verses 28 through 31.
So the greed, the deceit, the malice.
Gossip, arrogance, all of it. The religious insider might not be, participating in temple prostitution or bowing to a carved statue.
Right, the obvious pagan stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Paul is saying, look at your heart. Look at how you treat your neighbor. You are doing the exact same fundamental things. You're suppressing the truth and rebelling against God.
Wow.
And we really have to look at the specific Greek word Paul uses here for passing judgment.
Oh, I love getting into the Greek. What is it?
It's krino.
Krinu. Okay, how is that different from just, having an opinion or recognizing that someone did something wrong?
That's a crucial distinction to make. Krinu isn't just about moral discernment.
Like saying, hey, stealing is bad.
Right, it's not just that. Krinu refers to condemning someone. It's issuing a final, authoritative verdict on a person's ultimate standing before God.
Oh, wow.
The profound issue here is that those who judge those who krino are assuming a role that belongs exclusively, entirely to God.
So they aren't just observing a foul on the field. They are trying to permanently eject the player from the league. Like they're putting on the judge's black robe, picking up the gavel, and deciding who is in and who is out.
Exactly. And it's such a dangerous posture that later in this very same letter, in Romans 14, Paul will use this exact same concept, this same word, krin, to warn Gentile Christians not to pass judgment on the Jewish Christians.
Over things like dietary customs or holy days.
Yes. Yeah. But here in chapter 2, the critique is that the self-righteous are condemning the pagan world for their visible sins while engaging in the very same rebellious behaviors behind closed doors, just, in a more culturally refined way.
This makes me think of an analogy. As I was reading through these notes, it feels exactly like a hypocritical referee in sports.
Oh, how so?
Okay, imagine you're at this massive championship game. The referee blows the whistle, throws the flag, and calls a really harsh penalty on a player for a vicious, illegal foul.
Right.
The crowd goes wild, justice is served, the player is penalized. But meanwhile, that same referee is secretly on the sidelines, completely off camera, committing the exact same foul against someone else.
That's a great image.
It's absurd, right? It's the literal definition of hypocrisy. But here's the thing I keep getting stuck on.
What's that?
If they know they are doing the same things, if they know they struggle with greed or deceit just like the pagans do, why on earth do they think they will escape judgment?
Yeah.
How do they justify that in their own minds?
What's fascinating here is the psychological trap of group identity. Paul is zeroing in on people who relied on a covenant to shield themselves from personal accountability.
The covenant.
Right. The people he is addressing felt secure, not because they actually believed they had achieved moral perfection.
But because they possessed the law of Moses.
Exactly. They were ethnically Jewish. They were in a special historical covenant with God.
They had the history.
Yes. They looked at their heritage.
Yeah.
And basically assumed that because they belonged to the right group, the rules just didn't apply to them in the same way.
It's like they thought they had a get-out-of-jail-free card just by being born into the right family.
Or like an immunity idol.
Yes, exactly, an immunity idol, like in Survivor. They looked at their religious badge and said, we have the law, we have the history. Therefore, God's wrath applies to them out there, but God's kindness applies to us in here.
Regardless of how they actually lived.
Right.
And this leads to a tragic misunderstanding of God's character. The study notes point out that Paul confronts how they view God's kindness, his forbearance, and his patience.
Because they aren't experiencing immediate lightning bolts from heaven when they sin.
Exactly. They assume God is just okay with it. They view his patience not as a merciful opportunity to change course, but as permanent immunity.
Wow.
And Paul completely shatters that assumption. He points out that their experience of God's goodness, the fact that he hasn't judged them yet, has a very specific purpose.
What's the purpose?
Well, the notes highlight the Greek word metanoia, which we usually translate as repentance.
Okay, repentance. But we need to strip away our modern religious baggage from that word, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. Because when you hear repentance, what do you picture?
I just picture someone feeling really guilty, maybe crying at an altar, beating their chest, that kind of thing.
Right? We equate it almost entirely with an emotion. But metanoia literally means a change of mind.
A change of mind.
It describes a profound, fundamental change in mindset about sin and about God, which inevitably leads to a change in direction.
So it's an action, a pivot.
Yes.
Right.
Paul is saying God's patience is delaying judgment to give you time for metanoia. He's giving you space to turn around.
But instead of turning around,
They're taking that patience as proof of their exceptionalism. They think, God hasn't punished me, so he must approve of me.
which leads right to verse 5, where Paul uses this incredibly chilling, ironic twist. And I really want to linger on this because it's heavy.
It is very heavy.
Because of their hard and impenitent hearts, meaning they refuse to experience that metanoia, he says they are storing up wrath for themselves on the day of wrath.
Storing up wrath.
Now, the study notes point out how jarring this specific phrasing is. Why would this have sounded so shocking to a first-century ear?
Because the typical biblical metaphor, the imagery that any Jewish listener would have been intimately familiar with, is about storing up blessings.
Like saving up money in a spiritual bank account.
Yes, exactly. Think of the quintessential story of Joseph in Genesis 41.
Storing up the grain.
Right, storing up grain in the storehouses during the 7 years of plenty to survive the coming famine. Or even Paul himself later in his life writing in 1 Timothy.
Oh, about the wealthy.
Yeah, telling the wealthy to be generous, thereby storing up a good foundation for the future, storing up heavenly treasures.
So in a covenant context, the imagery of hoarding or accumulating is almost always positive.
Almost always. It's about preparation. It's about wisdom.
But Paul takes that familiar, comforting image and just twists the knife.
He really does.
He says, oh, you are hoarding all right. You're accumulating something. But you aren't storing up blessings.
Not at all.
Every single day you live in this hypocritical state, relying on your ethnic badge while secretly indulging in the same sins you judge others for. You are adding another drop to the reservoir of God's wrath.
What's a terrifying reversal, if you think about it.
It's chilling.
They are accumulating their own destruction, and they're completely blind to it, precisely because they are convinced they are on the winning team.
Wow.
And this day of wrath that Paul mentions, the notes explicitly connect this to the Old Testament concept of the day of Yahweh.
From the prophets, right. Like Isaiah and Joel.
Yes. The day of Yahweh was the long-awaited day when God would finally step into human history to set things right.
And the popular expectation was what?
The expectation was that on this day, God would deliver his covenant people and pour out his wrath on their pagan enemies.
Mm-hmm.
But the prophets, and now Paul, warn that if God's people are living like the pagans, that day will be a day of darkness and judgment for them too. In the New Testament, this merges with the day of Christ, the final judgment.
So this creates a massive, massive structural problem for the religious insider.
It pulls the rug right out from under them.
It does. If you pull out that foundational block, if group identity, having the law and being in the covenant don't automatically save you from this day of wrath, then what is the criteria?
That is the question.
If the referee's uniform doesn't grant immunity from the rules of the game, how does the league actually review the play? What is God's metric if it isn't tribal identity?
And that transition is exactly where Paul takes the argument next. If the shield of identity is gone, we have to face the impartial scales of divine justice.
The impartial scale.
In verses 6 through 11, Paul states flatly, quoting from the Old Testament, that God will render to each one according to his works.
Okay. According to his works. Let's stop right there. Because if you are someone who grew up in the church, or if you're familiar with Protestant theology at all, alarm bells are probably going off in your head right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and I have to push back a little on Paul's behalf, or rather, on the listener's behalf.
Go for it.
If God's judgment is entirely according to works, If it's just this giant cosmic scale weighing my good deeds against my bad deeds, doesn't that completely contradict the whole idea of grace?
It certainly sounds like it at first glance.
Right. Why is Paul hammering so hard on works here when literally everywhere else in his letters, even later in Romans, he is famously the champion of salvation by faith alone? I mean, didn't the Reformation happen precisely to push back against a works-based salvation?
That is the essential tension of Romans chapter 2. It is a brilliant question, and it's one that theologians have wrestled with for centuries.
So how do we reconcile it?
To resolve this, we have to look incredibly closely at what Paul means by a good work in the context of verse 7. The Faithlife study notes provide a crucial clarification here.
What do they say?
They note that a good work doesn't just mean, helping an old lady cross the street. It refers to the collective sum of a person's deeds that reflect God's character and fundamentally reflect a belief in him.
Okay, so it's not a transactional thing.
No, not at all.
He's not saying you clock in, do your community service hours, and God hands you a paycheck of salvation.
Exactly. Paul is not suddenly abandoning grace, having a theological crisis, and introducing a system where you can earn your way to heaven.
That would make no sense.
Right. What we have to remember is this specific argument he is dismantling right here. He is tearing down the false security of religious insiders who thought they could bypass obedience entirely just because of their ethnic or religious label.
They thought, I believe in the one true God. I have the law, therefore it doesn't matter how I live.
Yes. They were trying to separate faith from action. They were claiming the root, but producing none of the fruit.
I see. So Paul is arguing that true faith, genuine belief in God, inevitably, organically produces a life oriented toward God's will.
Exactly. The works are the visible, tangible evidence of the underlying faith.
God judges impartially by looking at the actual fruit of a person's life, which reveals the true root of their heart.
He refuses to play favorites based on external religious badges or family lineage.
Okay, that clarifies so much. So when he says God judges according to works, he's saying God looks at the empirical evidence of your life to validate the reality of your faith.
Yes.
You can't just claim you're an apple tree if you're constantly producing thorns. God looks at what's actually growing on the branches.
That is exactly right. And this concept is deeply rooted in the Hebrew scriptures. The study notes point us to Psalm 62, Job 34, Proverbs 24, and Jeremiah 17. God evaluates the actual lives of people.
It's all throughout the Old Testament.
It is. And Paul lays out the two different outcomes based on this evaluation. For those who do good, meaning their lives reflect genuine faith, there's glory, honor, immortality, and eternal peace.
And for those who do evil,
there's wrath, anger, and affliction.
Let's actually dig into those specific rewards for a minute, because it is so easy to just read glory and honor and think of it as generic religious jargon.
Just, church words.
Exactly. But the Greek terms the notes provide give this so much texture.
They really do. Let's start with glory. The Greek word is doxa,
which we see in words like doxology.
Yes. Now, in the ancient world, glory often referred to a person's reputation or the weight of their importance in society.
Like clout.
Like ancient clout, yeah. But here, the notes specify that Paul is referring to a future blessing of actually sharing in God's own glory. It's an eschatological hope.
Which is a fancy way of saying it's about the end times, the final restoration.
Right. And then there's honor.
Timo.
What does that imply? Timmy is this beautiful, intimate idea. It's not about being famous. It's about receiving approval and validation directly from God.
Wow.
Imagine standing before the creator of the universe and hearing, "Well done." That is Timmy.
That's powerful.
And peace, Arana, isn't just the absence of conflict. It's the Hebrew concept of shalom, a perfect, holistic well-being that comes from God setting the world right.
The word in this list that really catches my eye, though, is immortality.
Oh, that's a big one.
Because when I hear immortality, I immediately think of ancient Greek myths or maybe comic book superheroes who can't die. How did a first-century audience hear that word?
This is a fantastic point to expand on because the concept of immortality was a massive cultural battleground in the ancient world.
Really?
Oh, yeah. In Greek philosophical thought, like the ideas of Plato or Socrates, which were very popular and even influenced some Jewish writings like the Wisdom of Solomon and Mortality, was viewed as a natural, inherent state of the human soul.
Right. The idea was that the soul is pure, but it's trapped in this gross physical meat suit, the body.
The meat suit, exactly.
And death is just the soul finally escaping its prison to live forever in the clouds.
That was the popular Greek idea. But Paul's view, which is grounded in Jewish theology and the reality of Jesus' resurrection, is entirely different.
How so?
For Paul, as he explains brilliantly in 1 Corinthians 15, immortality is not an inherent property of the soul. The soul doesn't just naturally float away to a cloudy heaven.
Okay.
Immortality is an aspect of eternal life reserved for believers when God physically, tangibly raises the dead to a new resurrected life in a renewed creation.
That is such a vital distinction. It's not escaping the physical world, it's the redemption of the physical world.
Yes.
It's a gift of the coming age, given by God, not something we just naturally possess.
Right, it's a gift. And on the flip side of that glory, honor, and physical resurrection, Paul outlines the reality for those who do evil: wrath, anger, and affliction.
Affliction.
The notes point out the Greek word for affliction here, thlapsis.
Flapsis. Man, it sounds harsh just saying it.
It implies intense pressure, being crushed or squeezed. Yikes. It refers to the intense existential suffering experienced from condemnation on that final day of wrath. And here's the kicker, the part that would have made the religious insiders in Paul's audience just gasp.
What does he say?
He applies all of this, both the glorious rewards and the crushing punishments, to the Jew first and also the Greeks.
Jew first and also the Greek. That phrase, it just feels like the hinge of this entire argument. Why is that order so important to Paul?
It's a theological cornerstone for him. The Jewish people were literally first in blessing. Historically, God gave them priority.
Right. He called Abraham out of Ur.
He visited them. He delivered them from Egypt. He gave them the Torah. But Paul argues that priority in blessing inextricably means priority in judgment.
Accountability is directly tied to revelation.
Exactly. To whom much is given, much is required.
If you are at the front of the line to receive the real book, you are at the front of the line when the audit happens.
That's a great way to put it. Which brings us to verse 11, the summary of this whole section. For God shows no partiality.
No part.
The Greek word is incredible. Prostolimsia.
Prospolemsia. That's a mouthful. What does it mean?
It literally translates to receiving a face.
Receiving a face, like judging a book by its cover.
Yes, exactly. It means making unfair distinctions between people based on their external status, their wealth, their ethnicity, or their social face.
Wow.
God does not receive faces. He's not swayed by who your grandfather was or what religious title you hold. Deuteronomy 10 and Acts 10 both reinforce this throughout Scripture.
So he judges both Jews and Gentiles on the exact same basis.
Yeah.
The reality of their lives.
Exactly.
Okay, this is making total sense. The scales are balanced. But this brings up another massive, massive question.
Let's hear it.
If God judges purely based on the reality of our actions, and he shows absolutely zero partiality to religious labels,
Right.
what happens to the people who never even received the rule book in the first place? What about the Gentiles who didn't have the law of Moses? How can God judge them fairly if they didn't know the rules?
That is the natural next question, and Paul anticipates it perfectly. He's an expert debater.
He really is.
In verses 12 through 16, he addresses this exact tension between those who have the written law and those who don't. He says, "For as many as have sinned without law will also perish without law, and as many as have sinned under the law will be judged by the law."
Wait, hold on. Let's look at the first part of that. As many as have sinned without law will also perish without law. The notes say the word for perish there is apoleme, which refers to suffering the wrath of God and eternal separation.
Yes.
So Paul is saying that even if a Gentile is completely ignorant of the specific 10 commandments given to Moses at Mount Sinai, like Exodus 20 through 22, that ignorance doesn't make them sinless. They still perish.
They still perish.
How is that fair?
Because, as Paul will argue more fully in chapter 5, sin existed as a reality in the human heart long before the written law defined it on stone tablets.
Oh, I see.
The absence of a written speed limit doesn't mean you aren't driving recklessly.
That's a great analogy.
But Paul doesn't linger there long, because his real target is still the religious insider. He immediately turns back to the Jews, whom he calls the hearers of the law.
The hearers.
These were people who oriented their entire cultural and spiritual lives around possessing, studying, and reciting this written code. And in verse 13, he drops an absolute bombshell on them.
What does he say?
He says, "For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified."
Justified. The Greek word dikaiou.
Yes, dikaiou.
Right.
We need to pause here because this is one of the most important words in the entire New Testament.
It's huge.
It is a forensic legal term. It refers to God sitting as the cosmic judge, issuing a final verdict on Judgment Day, officially declaring a person to be right or just in his eyes.
Okay.
And to a first-century Jewish listener, Paul's statement is revolutionary. He is saying that merely possessing the law, merely sitting in the synagogue and hearing it read, grants zero favored status in that courtroom. Zero.
It's like, okay, it's the gym membership analogy.
Okay, lay it on me.
I'm just thinking out loud here, but being a hearer of the law in Paul's day is exactly like paying for a really expensive elite gym membership today.
Right.
You pay your dues, you get the little scan card, you walk into the facility, and you memorize where all the machines are. You might even read the manual for the treadmill word for word.
Sure.
You buy the branded gym bag and carry it around town so everyone knows, hey, I belong to this elite gym.
Status symbol.
Exactly. But here's the catch. You never actually lift a single weight. You never break a sweat. You never get on the treadmill. And yet somehow you look in the mirror and expect to be in peak physical condition just because you own the membership.
That is a perfect illustration.
Paul is basically looking at them and saying, no, you have to actually be a doer. The plastic membership card in your wallet doesn't make you fit. Doing the actual work makes you fit.
Right. Listening to the rules doesn't make you righteous. Living them out does. And that completely shatters their security. The possession of the law was their gym membership. But then, just when they're reeling from that, Paul complicates things even further for them.
Oh, boy.
He introduces this fascinating paradox of the Gentile conscience. In verse 14, he notes that sometimes Gentiles who do not have this written law from Sinai, who don't have the gym membership, instinctively do what the law requires.
He says they are a law to themselves.
Yes.
And the study notes say this is because the work of the law is written on their hearts. This immediately makes me think of the prophets. The notes connect this directly to Jeremiah 31.33, right?
Exactly. In Jeremiah 31, God promises a new covenant where his law won't just be carved on cold stone tablets. It will be internalized, written directly onto human hearts.
So Paul is applying that to everyone.
Yes, he's arguing that humanity, all of humanity, not just the Jewish people, has this natural moral sense, a conscience, that acts as an internal law.
It's an innate understanding of justice, fairness, and morality that aligns with God's design.
Right. So even if someone has never seen a Bible, they know deep down that murder is wrong, that betraying a friend is wrong, that stealing from someone who trusts you is wrong.
Yes, across all cultures, basically.
But, and this is a massive critical caveat that the study notes highlight, Paul is not saying this internal conscience is perfect.
Oh, definitely not.
He insists elsewhere in his letters, like in 1 Corinthians 8 and 1 Timothy 4, that the human conscience is weak.
It is deeply flawed.
It is prone to corruption. It can be seared or numbed by repeated sin. It is absolutely not an infallible guide.
So it's like a compass that works, but the glass is cracked and the needle gets stuck sometimes.
Exactly. So while this internal conscience is enough to hold a Gentile accountable because they inherently know they are violating their own internal moral code when they do wrong, it is absolutely not enough to save them.
The broken compass proves you are lost, but it can't get you home.
That's good. Very true.
And Paul wraps up this incredibly dense section in verse 16 by saying that all of this, the hidden secrets of every person's heart, whether they had the law or just a conscience, will be judged on that final day according to my gospel.
My gospel.
Now, when he says my gospel, he isn't claiming he went rogue and invented a unique personal version of Christianity, is he?
No, not at all. He means that the gospel he preaches, the message of Jesus Christ, completely upholds God's law by insisting that all of humanity is judged according to obedience.
The gospel doesn't sweep the requirement for justice under the rug.
Never.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture of where the book of Romans is heading, what is Paul's overarching strategy here? Why spend so much time on the law and the conscience?
Because he is purposefully, methodically painting everyone into a corner.
Basically, no one gets out alive.
Precisely. Look at what he's done. He has proven that the Gentile perishes because they inevitably violate the law written on their own corrupt conscience.
Yep.
And he has proven that the Jew is condemned because they inevitably violate the written law they so proudly boast in.
Hearer or doer, Jew or Gentile, religious insider or pagan outsider.
No one, absolutely no one, perfectly meets God's standard of justice. He is leveling the playing field of human depravity.
Wow.
And he has to do this to set the absolute, undeniable stage for the necessity of Jesus' saving work, which he is going to fully unveil in chapter 3.
Because if you don't realize you are terminally ill, you will never accept the cure.
Exactly.
He strips away every single defense mechanism. And once he establishes that merely holding the rule book doesn't save you, he takes the gloves completely off.
Oh, he does.
We are moving into verses 17 through 24, and this is where Paul goes on the offensive. He directly attacks the arrogant behavior of those who use the rule book to teach others while secretly breaking it themselves.
This is where the critique moves from philosophical to devastatingly personal and specific. Paul turns and looks directly at the camera, so to speak.
He breaks the fourth wall.
Yeah. He addresses the person who proudly calls himself a Jew and relies on the law for their exemption from judgment. He describes their self-perception, how they view themselves in society.
How did they view themselves?
They see themselves as a guide to the blind, a light to those in darkness, a corrector of the foolish, a teacher of children.
Which on the surface sounds noble, right? Being a guide to the blind is a good thing. But the notes point out something crucial here.
What's that?
Paul isn't just coming up with poetic titles. He is borrowing God's own language from the Old Testament.
Yes. He's referencing Isaiah 42, where God himself says that he will lead the blind by a way they do not know.
So by calling themselves the guide to the blind, they're basically trying to play God.
Paul's highlighting their breathtaking arrogance. He is mocking their attitude of moral superiority because they have effectively elevated themselves to God's position.
They have the form of knowledge and truth in the law, but they lack the reality of it in their lives.
Exactly. And then Paul just unleashes this rapid-fire series of questions.
It's like a prosecutor cross-examining a witness on the stand, exposing their specific hypocrisies.
It really is. He says, "You then, who teach others, do you not teach yourself?" And he hits them with 3 major, specific violations of the 10 Commandments from Exodus 20.
Right. And he doesn't pick minor infractions.
Yeah, he goes straight for the big ones.
He says, while you preach against stealing, do you steal?
Yeah.
You who say that one must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples?
Yeah. These correlate directly to Exodus 20.15, 20.14, and 20.4.
He is accusing the very people who possess and guard the law of completely undermining its entire purpose by failing to heed its commands in their private lives.
It's just brutal.
It is. He basically looks at these self-appointed religious life coaches and says, you're telling people not to steal. I just saw you pocket something.
Right.
You're telling people to honor marriage and purity. We all know what you are doing behind closed doors.
Yeah.
And the tragic climax of this hypocrisy is found in verse 24. This is a verse that should make every single person who claims to be a believer stop and tremble.
It's a heavy one.
Paul quotes the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament. Specifically, he quotes Isaiah 52.5. He says to them, "The name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you."
That is the ultimate indictment.
So, what does this all mean in the grand scheme of the biblical story? When you stop and think about the historical mission of Israel, this is an absolute, unmitigated catastrophe.
It's a complete failure of their calling.
God elected Israel, going all the way back to Genesis 12 with Abraham. He chose them to bear the promise and to be a blessing to all the families of the earth.
Right.
They were supposed to be the city on a hill, the beacon of light that drew the Gentile nations in so that the whole world would look at them and want to call upon the name of the Lord.
That was their divine vocation. They were meant to display the holy, loving, just character of God to a watching world.
But the profound tragedy that Paul is exposing here is a complete 180-degree reversal of that mission.
Instead of drawing the Gentiles to God, the hypocrisy of God's people is actively repelling them.
The Gentiles look at the behavior of the religious insiders. They see the massive, glaring disconnect between the morality they preach and the corruption of how they actually live, and as a result, they don't praise God.
No, they curse and blaspheme God's name.
They say, if that's what your God produces, I want absolutely nothing to do with him. It is incredibly heavy.
It is the most damaging witness possible.
And honestly, it is painfully, acutely relevant today. I mean, we don't even have to look hard to see this.
Not at all.
How many people today turn away from faith entirely? How many people wash their hands of the church, deconstruct their beliefs, or just walk away in disgust? Not because they have a philosophical problem with Jesus, but because they see the self-appointed guides to the blind breaking their own rules behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Because they see leaders embroiled in scandals or congregations treating outsiders with malice while preaching love.
It's a devastating reality. And from a theological standpoint, Paul is doing something revolutionary here.
What's he doing?
He is showing how transgressing the law puts the Jewish person on the exact same footing as the ungodly Gentiles he described back in chapter 1.
Rrr.
In chapter 1, the pagan Gentiles dishonored God by suppressing the truth of nature. Here in chapter 2, the religious insiders dishonor God by breaking the written law they boast in.
The mechanism is different, but the result is identical.
Exactly. The very law they relied on as their impenetrable shield has become the star witness for the prosecution. It has become their primary accuser.
Which leaves them backed into a corner with only one last defense.
They're running out of options.
They really are. If possessing the law isn't enough to save you, and if teaching the law to others isn't enough to save you, what about the physical sign of the covenant?
Right.
What about the actual mark on your body? In the final section of chapter 2, verses 25 through 29, Paul takes aim at the most sacred, non-negotiable marker of identity in the ancient Jewish world: circumcision.
Circumcision was the ultimate marker. We cannot overstate how important this was in the first century.
Yeah, how big of a deal was it?
As we see in the debates in Acts 15 in the early church, circumcision was deeply, inextricably connected to Jewish identity and their covenant with God. To a first-century Jew, being circumcised was the definitive proof that you belonged to God's family. Full stop. It was the boundary line.
Paul, relentless as always, says that circumcision is of value only if you obey the law.
Only if.
If you break the law, your circumcision literally becomes uncircumcision. It loses all of its value, all of its protective power.
In fact, he argues that circumcision actually makes your sin worse because it proves a person didn't act out of ignorance.
Oh, wow.
Think about it. They bore the physical mark of the covenant on their own body. They knew the requirements intimately, and they still consciously chose to break them.
That makes total sense.
And then, just to completely dismantle their worldview, Paul flips the world upside down in verse 26.
What does he ask?
He asks, if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision?
That would have sounded like utter heresy to a Pharisee.
Utter heresy.
Right.
He's saying that an uncircumcised Gentile who actually genuinely keeps the moral precepts of the law will stand in judgment over the circumcised Jewish person who transgresses it, despite having the precise written code and the physical mark.
I look at this like let's call it the wedding ring analogy.
Oh, okay, let's hear it.
Circumcision was meant to be an outward physical sign of an inward spiritual reality, just like a wedding ring.
Right.
A wedding ring is a beautiful symbol. It represents a covenant, a promise of fidelity, and exclusive love. But wearing a wedding ring means absolutely nothing if you are actively cheating on your spouse.
It's just a piece of metal at that point.
Exactly. The gold band on your finger doesn't magically make you a faithful partner if your actions are continually betraying the marriage. The outward sign cannot cover up the inward unfaithfulness.
In fact, wearing the ring while cheating almost makes the betrayal worse because it highlights the hypocrisy.
That is exactly Paul's point. The physical mark is utterly useless, even offensive, if it doesn't reflect a genuine internal loyalty to God.
And what's crucial to understand here is that this isn't some new radical concept Paul is inventing out of thin air to upset people.
Right, he's not just making this up.
No, he is deeply rooted in his own scriptures. He is echoing the ancient prophets. He's alluding to places like Jeremiah 4 and Jeremiah 9.
What did Jeremiah say?
The prophet warned the people of Judah that physical circumcision wasn't enough. They needed to circumcise their hearts.
Circumcise their hearts.
God has always, from the very beginning, demanded obedience with the mind and body. He wants a complete inward transformation, not just compliance with a physical outward ritual.
Which brings us to the climax of the chapter in verse 29, where Paul makes this definitive paradigm-shifting statement. He says, "But a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter."
We have to spend some time unpacking this contrast between the spirit and the letter, because it is the foundation of Paul's entire theology of the Christian life.
Let's do it. What's the difference?
Well, the letter refers to the precise written code, the Old Covenant law carved on stone.
Okay.
And the fatal limitation of the letter, which Paul explores deeply later in Romans 7 and also in 2 Corinthians 3, is that a written code, no matter how holy or perfect it is, cannot change a human heart.
It's just external.
Exactly. It can tell you what is right, it can give you the standard, and it can rightly condemn you when you fall short. But it possesses absolutely zero power to transform your fallen nature.
It's just words on stone. It's a mirror that shows you the dirt on your face, but the mirror can't wash your face.
That is a brilliant way to put it. The letter diagnoses the disease, but it offers no cure.
But the Spirit.
The Spirit represents the new covenant. The Holy Spirit actually does the transformative, regenerative work in the believer's life that the law could never do.
So the Spirit actually changes the desires, the affections, the very root of the human heart.
Yes, Christ is the only one who can perform this spiritual surgery, this true circumcision of the heart, as Paul writes in Colossians 2 and Philippians 3. It has to be an inside-out transformation, not an outside-in conformity.
And Paul ends the chapter with a brilliant little play on words.
Oh, the name Judah.
Yes. He says that the person who has experienced this true inward circumcision by the Spirit receives their praise not from people, but from God. And the notes point out that the name Judah, from which the word Jew is derived, actually means praise.
That is such a cool detail.
Right. So a true Jew is one who receives praise from God. And the study notes tie this directly to Jesus' words in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6.
Oh, about practicing righteousness.
Exactly. Jesus fiercely warned against practicing your righteousness just to be seen by an audience, just to get applause from the crowd, just to look good on the outside.
This raises an incredibly important question for all of us living right now, thousands of years later.
It really does.
Because it is so easy to read Romans 2 as a historical document and think, wow, those ancient people really had a problem with legalism and hypocrisy. Glad we figured that out.
Right, like it's just a history lesson.
Human nature hasn't changed one bit. We do the exact same thing today. How often do we rely on our own modern external badges to prove we are righteous?
Oh, all the time.
Maybe it's not physical circumcision today. Maybe it's having perfect church attendance.
Or coming from a long line of respected believers.
Right. Maybe it's having a reputation for public morality, or posting the right theological quotes online, or voting for the correct political party.
We painstakingly build these external resumes to prove to ourselves and others that we are the good guys.
But while we are busy polishing our public image, our internal lives, our private thoughts, our secret behaviors, our actual loves and desires remain completely untransformed by the Spirit.
We curate the outside to hide the inside. We polish the wedding ring while completely ignoring the health of the marriage.
Precisely. And Paul's warning, ringing through the centuries, is that the impartial judge of the universe is not impressed by the polish.
Not at all.
He is not fooled by the resume. He is looking squarely at the heart.
What an incredibly sobering, heavy, and yet absolutely necessary deep dive this has been today. I want to take a second to summarize the journey we've just walked through.
That's been quite a journey.
It has. Paul has systematically, brick by logical brick, torn down every single false refuge that we try to use to hide from God's justice. He dismantled the illusion of moral superiority by showing that the judge commits the same crimes as the accused.
He dismantled the shield of ethnic and religious heritage.
He dismantled the idea that merely possessing the rule book makes you righteous. And finally, he dismantled the value of outward physical signs of religion when they are divorced from internal reality.
He leaves no stone unturned.
He has shown us that God's judgment is flawlessly, terrifyingly impartial. It cuts right through the external letter, right through our carefully constructed public faces to examine the inward spirit.
Because at the end of the day, it isn't about what group we claim to belong to or what labels we wear. It's about what the Spirit of God is actually doing to transform our hearts.
And that's exactly where Paul wants us. He leaves no room for pretending.
He forces us to realize that without the miraculous, transformative work of the Spirit, every single one of us, insider or outsider, is completely without excuse. We need rescue.
And that brings us to the end of our time today. But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day.
Something to think about on the commute.
Exactly. We talked at length during this deep dive about verses 14 and 15, where Paul mentions that even those without the Bible have a natural moral law written on their hearts, a conscience. We all have this internal compass.
So good.
Yet, he also insists, and the rest of Scripture affirms, that this very human conscience is weak. It is easily seared. It is highly prone to corruption based on our culture, our habits, and our own self-deception.
That's the tension.
So for you, as you navigate a modern world that is constantly overflowing with information overload, endless media spin, and profound, dizzying moral complexity, how do you calibrate a broken moral compass?
Wow.
When you realize you can't even fully trust your own internal sense of right and wrong because it might be tainted by your own hypocrisy, where do you look to find true north? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive on Reformed thinking.
It's been great.
Keep digging into your sources, keep examining the hidden spaces of your own heart, and most importantly, keep asking the hard questions.